Hello and welcome everyone to this video on best practices for SAP OData Development by ZaranTech. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our ZaranTech YouTube channel and hit the bell icon to never miss any update from us.
So hello everyone, in this video we are going to discuss best practices in OData development. So let's start with the introduction part. So the introduction part is overview of OData. What is an OData? So OData is nothing but an open data protocol which is used as a backend for performing crude operation in OData services, and it acts as a backend for your front-end application built on UI5 or Fiori. So what is the importance of adhering best practices in OData development? Go see it. So best practices means using better queries and so that it impacts less on your databases. Also, benefits of well-structured OData services is its efficiency will be increased, and it's the time it is taking to perform any operation will also be increased, and vice versa. So the prerequisites which are required for performing the best practices is you should have a basic understanding of OData service. Means you know what is the value, meaning of entity types there, what is the association. So entity is nothing but a structure, and it can store a single record at a time, and this structure consists of the fields along with their data type. Then we have entity set. It acts as an internal table where we can store multiple records at a time, and so we also need to have a familiar with the gateway client. This gateway client acts as a testing tool for local device, which you can use for testing your OData services locally. So let's start with the best practices for OData development. The first one is designing the data model. So you need to understand what is a data model. Here it is the one of the folders that we have got in our OData. See, this is a every OData will get this 4 folders. The first one is the data model, and it consists of entity types, and entity sets. Also the association and navigation one. So we need to follow OData standards for best practices, that is adhere to the OData specification guidelines. We should always use the specification guidelines for creating the data model. Then we should use standard OData entity set properties and navigation properties, because they are designed in a perfect way so that the efficiency of your OData can be increased. Also, you should keep the model simple. Design a simple and intuitive data model, and always try to avoid unnecessary complexity. Ensure that the model is easy to understand and use. Don't make it too complex that your OData gets into an internal server error. Then we have used meaningful names. Always try to give meaningful names so that you can test OData. While testing, you do not confuse your name with other entities. So, because if you give any wrong name there, even if the naming convention is not proper, you are going to get an error while testing your OData. So it is very crucial to give perfect names for your OData services. So use proper meaning names here. So name, entity, properties, and navigation properties clearly and descriptively. Then ensure consistency in naming conventions. The naming convention should be consistent, and also then you need to normalize data. That is, you should avoid redundancy by normalizing the data model. Then you can also use navigation property to define the relationship between entities, so that you can use the concept of deep entity, and you can implement your get expanded entity methods to get data from multiple related time with a multiple related get record from the multiple related tables using a single URI. So this one is the designing the data model. The second one is the implementing CRUD operation, which is the main requirement of any OData service. The first one is efficient data access. You need to optimize data access for performance. And you should always use appropriate indexes for database optimization technique. Also, you are required to implement the business logic. In this business logic, you'll see incorporate necessary business logic in crude operation. Whatever the logic you are writing, you should be using the proper syntaxes and better use the new syntaxes because they are more optimized syntaxes at this moment. And then you need to validate data and enforce business rules in create and update operations. Then you are also required to perform the error handling and implement robust error handling mechanisms. Also, you are required to provide meaningful error messages to help customer understand issues. Then we are required for understand the enhancing performance. So for that purpose, we can use batch requests. Batch requests to reduce the number of round trips between client and server. Now, what is the meaning of it? It is the simple meaning. Suppose you have implemented your get entity method and you want to call it 10 times. So you can use the concept of batch request so that you are required to give a single HTTP request and you will be able to trigger your method 10 times. Also group multiple operation into a single batch request where possible. As I explained it now that we can use a single HTTP to call your method multiple times by using the concept of batch in OData services. Then we are also required to use the concept of paging and filtering. So implement server-side paging to handle large data set. So we are required to implement server-side paging to handle large data sets and support OData queries option like filter, top, skip, and order by. These are some of the statements using OData services to fetch the required kind of data for efficient data retrieval. Then we have caching. So use caching mechanism to improve performance and reduce server load. So we are required to use caching mechanism to improve performance and reduce the server load. Also, we need to implement cache control headers to manage cache behavior. Then we have security best practices. So for security reason, you should always go for authorization and authentication so that if a user has no authorization to access your OData services or to write any logic in your OData services, then he cannot be allowed to open it. Otherwise, it can hamper and it can cause trouble to your data. So implement authorization or other authentication mechanism to secure or your OData services. Then enforce role-based access control RBAC to restrict access to sensitive data. Then we have data encryption. So use HTTPS to encrypt data transmission between client and server. Then ensure sensitive data is encrypted at rest in the database. Also, you are required to do the input validation. So validate all input data to prevent injection attacks and other security vulnerabilities. Also, sanitize input to remove any malicious content. Then we have documentation and versioning. So see, comprehensive documentation. So document the OData service including entity sets, properties, navigation properties, and query options. Then also provide examples of how to use the service of common scenarios. Then we've got the API versioning. So implement versioning to manage changes and maintain backward compatibility. And also use URL or header based versioning to differentiate between versions. The last one is we have got the testing and monitoring. So automated testing is preferred. So develop automated tests for OData services to ensure reliability and correctness. So always develop OData automated tests so that you can ensure the reliability and correctness. Then you should always use to test CRUD operations, query options, and edge cases so that if there is any error, you can improve it before the deployment part. Then we have monitoring and logging. So implement monitoring to track users and performance metrics. Then set up logging to capture errors and debug information. At last, we have the conclusion. So, a recap of the importance of the best practices in OData development. So, always use the best practices concept, then encouragement to implement these practices for robust and efficient data services. And at last, invitation to view related videos in SAP Web Mastery series so that you can understand this concept more better for best practices of your OData development. So this is all about the best practices in the OData development. Thank you very much.